It was a cold October night when Daniel was driving down a lonely stretch of highway. The road was empty, the sky moonless, just a blanket of darkness pressing against his windshield. He was heading home from a work trip, his eyelids heavy, when he saw her. A woman stood at the side of the road, her pale face barely illuminated by his headlights. She wore a tattered white dress that billowed slightly in the wind. Her thumb was out. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't the type to pick up strangers, but something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she looked so lost. He rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and as she slid into the passenger seat, Daniel couldn't help but notice how cold the air had suddenly become. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She was beautiful, but something about her face unsettled him. It was too pale, her eyes too hollow. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home," she murmured. Daniel nodded, focusing back on the road. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. After a few minutes, he tried again. "What were you doing out here all alone?" She turned her head slowly to look at him. "Waiting." A chill ran down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but something about her voice made his skin crawl. He kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Then, in his peripheral vision, he saw something that made his breath hitch. Her hands, her fingers were impossibly long, thin, and twisted, with nails black as coal. They twitched slightly, like they were eager to move. His pulse quickened. He forced himself to stay calm. "Do you live nearby?" "Not anymore." Daniel's stomach dropped, his hands grew clammy on the wheel, and then he glanced in the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back at him wasn't hers. It was something else. A face, twisted and hollow, with eyes like black pits, a mouth stretched too wide in a grin, revealing jagged, needle-like teeth. It was sitting right beside him. Daniel slammed on the brakes. His heart pounded as he turned to look at her. But she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door had never opened. The seatbelt was still fastened. His breathing was ragged, his mind spinning. And then, a whisper. "Take me home." The next morning, Daniel's car was found abandoned on the side of the highway. The driver's seat was empty, but in the passenger seat, there was a deep imprint, as if someone had been sitting there, waiting. The small-town diner was warm and buzzing with quiet conversation. The local sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s, sat at the counter nursing a cup of coffee. Across from him, a young deputy scrolled through his phone, reading the latest local news. "Another one went missing last night. Same stretch of road." The sheriff grunted. He didn't need to read the article to know. He had heard the stories for years. "And let me guess, the car was there, but the driver wasn't?" The deputy nodded, uneasy. "Just like the others." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. He had seen this too many times before. A waitress, an elderly woman with kind eyes, set a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. She hesitated before speaking. "You know, my grandma used to tell me stories about that road, about her." The sheriff looked up. "Her?" The waitress nodded, lowering her voice. "The woman in white. They say she was left there decades ago by a man who promised to take her home. But he never did. So she waits. And anyone who picks her up, well, they never make it home either." The deputy swallowed hard. Outside the diner, the wind howled through the trees, carrying a whisper with it. "Take me home." The highway stretched into the darkness, empty and waiting.